Welcome to my photo friends. I'm your host Joshua. I'm a photographer, and for the past 10 years I've been involved in the Elgin photographic community. Through those years I've met dozens of local photographers. Meeting these photographers brings genuine excitement to me as a photographer. You see, photography can be a very individual activity since there is only one person pressing the shutter button. By getting to know other photographers, I get to learn from their passion and knowledge. By sharing these interviews, I hope any photographer can learn and become an even better photographer and artist. Before we begin, I'd like to thank a few people. First off, thank you to my wife, Sarah. Her wisdom has been essential as I have developed these interview series. She has spent hours hearing my ideas and providing encouraging feedback. Secondly, a very heartfelt thank you to the Elgin History Museum for hosting our interview today. An essential reason that Elgin is such a strong community is because so many people are passionately proud of Elgin. The Elgin History Museum and their staff and volunteers do an incredible job of keeping Elgin's history alive and building pride in this great city. Thank you to the Elgin History Museum for allowing us to use this space today. Lastly, thank you to Ray, who is managing our recordings. Ira and I met several years ago when we were both attending a camera club in downtown Elgin. Ira photographs many subjects, a wide variety from nature and wildlife and older cars, but I've always been fascinated and intrigued by his still life photography and have been inspired by his willingness to share his skills with several local organizations. The Hawthorne Hill Nature Center and the Elgin History Museum are just two examples. Photographers often ask, "How did you take that photo?" But I know from spending time with Ira that he has spent time thinking about why did you take that photo. Please welcome Ira Marcus as my next photo friend. Ira, why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself and what inspires you artistically?
Okay, I'll try to be quick about this because I've been doing photography for close to 60 years. I think the best way to describe my photographic journey is that there's been a lot of evolution and a lot of opportunities. And by evolution, what I mean is I've changed my interest in photography over the years. I used to do a lot more street and people photography. The interview last week kind of reminded me of that. Did a lot of that in my 20s. And over time, my interests have changed, and they're still changing. That's one of the really fun things about photography is I can become pretty saturated pretty quickly and want to move on to something else, and there's always other subjects and other things you can do. The opportunity side of this is I found throughout my lifetime, I've been in positions where somehow I found an opportunity to use my photography for maybe an organization I worked for. In high school, I served on the yearbook staff, so I learned about layout and photographing groups and events. In college, I ended up being a photo editor of our college newspaper, which led to, and I have to do this, so forgive me, but it led to my 15 minutes of fame. This is a CD, but this was an album that came out in 1974. If you've ever heard of Funkadelics, Parliament Funkadelic, I photographed them for this album. On the inside liner, there are portraits of each of the people. It was I won't go into the whole long story, but because of my involvement in the school newspaper, I met the person who did the artwork for these photo covers. So that gave me the opportunity, he asked me to help out. So I've had other similar kinds of opportunities throughout my lifetime through my work and other things. So like I say, evolution and opportunity have kind of defined my photograph. You also asked inspiration.
Yeah.
I think my initial inspiration came from my older brother. He was 9 years older than I was, and we always did some kind of photo stuff around the house when we were kids and family stuff. And I have other relatives who are artists and musicians, but that was always present. But one day my brother came home, I was probably by that time in my early teens or whatever, with a 35 millimeter single lens reflex. Prior to that I had little brownie box camera and things that were all hand-me-downs and that we used. But he came home with his camera, and I thought, what's this all about? And he was, and he inspires me to this day. And this was, again, 50 years ago since he's passed, but he did a lot of things where he would set up scenes, and he did things that, he taught me about f-stop and shutter speeds and depth of field, and that photography could be so much more than doing events and people and that sort of thing. So two other inspirations, and I had to think about this ahead of time a little bit, but I think I was inspired a bit by Edward Weston, who did, for those of you who don't know who he was, a photographer probably back in the 20s and 30s, and I may be wrong about the dates on that, but he did a series of photographs of pepper, and they were very sensual in nature. They looked like they could have been a nude, except there were no arms or legs, but it was very interesting to see photographs that maybe don't look like photographs. So that was an inspiration. Another inspiration would have been Dorothea, help me with the last name. Lang, thank you. Dorothea Lang, who did all these Depression era photographs of people in various situations and throughout the Dust Bowl migration to California. The way she captured people that told the whole story, much more than just those people in the photo. So I think those are all things, I'm no Dorothea Lang or Edward Weston, but those are all things that influenced me somewhere along the way.
Okay. You and I had a conversation after last week's interview about street photography and how it relates to journalistic photography. And there's a concern with photographing people even in a public setting. Do you mind sharing your thoughts concerning street photography? And then we can talk about a particular photo that you and I have already had a discussion about. But
when I was in college, in late teens, early 20s, I had my camera with me everywhere, and I would photograph all kinds of people and things. It was just, I thought I was going to be the next, I don't know, whoever, but, and I thought that was really good. And I have a photo in particular, not one we have here today, but there was one of a probably homeless person who was passed out on the ground, and another person bending over him holding a paper bag that obviously had a bottle in it. And I don't know if he was checking to see if he was okay or just maybe fleecing him for whatever he could take from him. But this was out in Grant Park in Chicago. And I have a photo of that. And I look at that now, many years later, and being a little more inhibited than I was when I was 20 years old. And I really feel it was an invasion of their privacy. Some pictures I have taken on vacation, we were in the Bahamas, and I have a picture of two women sitting in chairs, one of them shucking peas in a bowl. It's really a cool picture. It's one of those things that I think is like a National Geographic picture, probably not that quality. But again, I look at that and I say, was that my job to take their picture? And there was somebody, we were talking about this after your last interview, there was somebody there who used the word exploitation. And he said, if you're not exploiting the person, if you're really doing it for journalistic purposes, nothing wrong. If you're doing it to say what a great photographer you are or how you're capturing these moments, then maybe it's exploitation. And when we talked about Dorothea Lang a second ago, there's one very famous picture that she has of a mother and two children. That was a posed picture. You would never know that, and it was very appropriate for the time. It captured the image, but that was actually posed. So I don't know if that's where you were going with the street photography question, or
I wanted to see where you went with it. So I'm going to put up the photo that we alluded to. So for those of you who may not be able to see, the top banner says "Impeach Nixon," and the bottom banner says "God loves Nixon." And Ira sent this to me and said, "I don't know if this is worth talking about." And I thought, man, so this photo would have to be 8-9 years before I was born.
This was on, I
But
actually,
yeah, give us a little bit of this scene.
after I sent this to you, I did a little research because I knew the situation here. This was March 15th of 1974, so
Okay.
it was before I was born too. But I was in college then. I went to Roosevelt University in downtown Chicago, and this was across the street. Richard Nixon was speaking at the Conrad Hilton Hotel. This is just, I think, months before he resigned. But he was speaking there, and this was on Michigan Avenue, right across the street from the hotel, a couple blocks south of Congress. And there was this big protest there. And when I took the picture, I don't think I realized it at the time, but the juxtaposition of the impeach Nixon and God loves Nixon. But then when you look more closely throughout here, there's some other signs that have nothing to do with this. There's one about something about wine, about Gallo wine that they were protesting. Yeah, back over here. Please don't buy Gallo wines. There were a couple other things in there. I think there were some religious ones. They may have been off to the side, but it was just like a piece of a slice of life at that time. And again, it's one of those things that I just kind of, it's been a favorite image of mine for 50 years.
Yeah, and I look at it because, you know, I read about Nixon from the history books. And by the time I would have been aware of, you know, the situation that Nixon was involved in, you know, this is a 20-year-old situation, older. And so to see people defending Nixon hadn't occurred to me. And yet we see that throughout many things that we record with our cameras is, you know, 20 years later, it tells a much more vibrant version than what we remember.
Right.
And what the history books may even tell us. So you've been involved with, I'm going to change topics.
Good.
You've been involved with quite a bit of local photography with local organizations throughout, and then throughout your career as well. Can you tell us about the differences between shooting for your own enjoyment and then shooting for your job or as a volunteer?
Well, sometimes I think those lines can cross, but I always approach when I'm doing something for somebody else, like the museum here, where I do a lot of photography for them. They're my client. I mean, I'm not getting paid because I'm a volunteer, but they're my client, and I need to produce what it is they need. So I treat myself in that case not as a photographer who's doing it as a hobby or for himself, but as I say, for somebody else's needs. But where they can blend a little bit is I still get pleasure out of doing it. In the case of the museum, what I do here, one of the things is the museum has thousands of objects that they can't have on display that help tell the story of Elgin. And what they've been doing, and what my wife Jackie and I have been doing for the last 5 years or so at the museum, is photographing these objects, and then they are put on an online database so people who are doing research can look them up and, you know, find the actual object associated with the story that goes with it. But a lot of these objects, and this will lead to one of the pictures that we have here, a lot of these objects have really interesting characteristics to them. And when you look at them, because some are very old, so there's deterioration, and a couple of things that I really like photographing are things that have a lot of texture or interesting surfaces that normally you just pass by, you don't see or look at, but because you can look at a very small piece of something with the camera, you can bring the attention of the object to it. So I saw that in some of the objects we were photographing here, and I made a whole series of photographs. Many of them were macros, some of them were things that I just digitally altered to make them interesting or different. And I approached the curator and the director of the museum, and I said, how about if we did an exhibit where we took these photographs that looked nothing like the object themselves, the way I photographed them, and did an exhibit with the actual object and then my photograph that doesn't look like the object. So that was really pretty fascinating. The one, I don't know if you want to bring it up or not, or if you were going to get to that later. This is the image I'm talking about. This is one from the exhibit. So I guess I will ask the people who are sitting here, anybody have any idea what that is?
So I've seen this obviously
Yeah.
a couple of times, and until you've told this story, I assumed it was a portion of like a barn or an exterior of a building. I'm wrong.
It's a steamer trunk. It's the latch on an old steamer trunk, probably dated back to anywhere from the 1890s to maybe 1910, that they have here. And it's very deteriorated. This is metal. Up that kind of goldish color is metal. This is leather. The orange in the middle is what's left of a leather strap. That went across here when the whole leather was there. But what struck me, when you're looking at a whole steamer trunk, you don't notice that little bit of detail. This image is something that, in actuality, from top to bottom, is probably 4 inches, maybe 6 inches wide. So it's a macro photo, but what I saw was this abstract, I call this one linear textures, because you have all of these different lines and angles, and you have these very contrasting colors, but at the same time, you've got all this texture in there. And then the way I had it lit, which is probably by accident, because when I light these objects to photograph them, I'm doing representational photography, and I really want to get all the detail I can in it. This happens to be, while we were doing it, I said I'm going to take a few more minutes and I'm going to do something else with it. I created this photo. But what I didn't realize is just the way the light varies across this black old leather that's deteriorating. And I love abstract, and this kind of is typical of what I like to do with some abstract things. And didn't really do much processing to this. I did probably saturate the colors a little bit, but not all that much. We could go upstairs here where this trunk is residing, and you look at it, and if you looked at that little detail of it, you'd say, oh yeah, those colors are in there.
Yeah. So let me ask you, with this photo in mind, kind of an extension of the previous conversation. I think everyone can relate to taking a photo that's, we'll call it documentary. Mm-hmm. Like the insurance company asks for a photo of your driver's license. I don't think anybody in here would think that that's art. Mm-hmm. And yet, a lot of what you work on, I remember seeing you randomly downtown taking pictures of the Elgin artwork, the public art, I believe. And you're taking photos of art, but yet you're trying to do it in an artistic manner. Is there a point where that documentary work that you may be doing for the History Museum or of the artwork blends out of documentary and more into artistic representation, where you would consider it art and not just recording the scene, as it were?
Yeah, I don't know that the two are mutually exclusive. I think it depends on what you were referring to was a program that the museum was doing for the city to document all of their artwork. And they'd asked me to photograph the public artwork around the city, and they had a list. I wouldn't call any of that artful in what I did with that. As a matter of fact, some of it was not very good photography. I mean, it was very challenging to do some of these things in situ. But your question, does it cross over into art? I think it can. I think it depends on if you're doing some very dramatic lighting with it. I have a photo that I've done of some Native American pottery where it's just, the artistry is in the pottery, not in my photograph of it. But what I did is I made it totally dark, so part of the pottery you don't even see. It's totally black and a black background, and it's kind of coming out of it. So, to me, that's a very artistic, but it's also very representational of the item too. So I think it can be both. More often than not, though, if I'm doing representational photography, it's representational photography, and I try to have it as accurately represent the item as I can.
Okay. Before digital cameras and Photoshop, editing was we'll call it restrictive. But now the editing process has become so much more powerful and accessible. Every smartphone has editing tools built into it. How has this editing revolution over the past 30 to 35 years impacted photography? And I mean that in a broad sense, but also in your photography. And I'll let you answer that, and then I'm going to use a couple of your the images that you submitted, and you can talk about those.
Well, I think one is, there are probably two ways to look at that. One is it has enabled people to, or many people, to do more photography and have it come out. It used to be when we were kids and stuff, you'd send your, sound like an old guy again, you'd send your film off, you'd give it to the drugstore, and a week later you'd get it and you'd look through and half of your images would be no good, and the other half. So what it's done is it's allowed people to get instant feedback. As soon as I take that picture, I know whether or not it's a good picture. And additionally, if it's sort of a good picture, a great composition, but maybe it's a little soft in focus, or maybe your lighting's off a little bit, you can do all these adjustments. So I think it's made photography, good photography, a lot more available to people and accessible, especially with the quality of what you see in smartphones now. I sort of, when they first came out, I sort of poo-pooed, I'm a photographer, I have 5,000 pieces of equipment that I have to lug around. You can't do the same thing with a little camera, but now you can. Some of these cameras are so much more advanced than the earlier single lens reflexes I've had. The other piece of that question, I think, is you can do artistic things that you couldn't do before. And this may lead to, I don't know which one you're going to show. Yeah. So, did you have a comment or anything?
Nope, go ahead.
Okay. So on this photo, this is highly, highly edited. This is two photos merged together. This is we have daffodils planted in our yard, and it was a rainy day. This was taken April, maybe late March this year, and the daffodils were all in bloom, looked really nice, and it was a rainy day, and I'm looking out my dining room window, and I see these rain splotches on the window, and it had this kind of almost impressionist feeling to it when you looked out at it. And I took a half a dozen photos, tried some different settings. None of them captured what I was trying to capture. And I realized why, and I realized that I had to do more than one photo and merge them together to get what I was trying to get. I couldn't have done that if we didn't have digital photography. That's not something I could have done in a dark room.
Yeah.
Maybe some people could, but I couldn't with my darkroom skills. So it allows somebody to take something and make it more of a piece of art. Some of the things I did on here, I merged the two photos, so you get a little bit of movement of the flowers. By the time I got through, the window and the rain and everything else, some of those yellows were not so bright. So I selectively saturated color. I even painted using a brush, a Photoshop brush and colors, and added some little things in or took some things out. I used some filters, digital filters afterwards, to give it this more of a oil painting kind of feel to it. And it's not, some people look at, I don't know much about Lightroom, but I think Lightroom has some preset filters where you can just do that. Elements does too, but none of them really do quite what you want, at least in my case. So I may be using multiple filters and adjusting them. I probably spent 2 or 3 hours to get this image on the computer. Taking it took 5 minutes, but I probably spent several hours on that one.
And then you've got another one. You called this one Pond in Winter Fog.
Yeah, this is what you can do with a crappy photo. This was taken up in Muskego, Wisconsin. It was actually, we were at my niece's house this last winter, and we were up there. I didn't have my camera with me. This was taken with a cell phone. And I really liked the composition, and I liked the feel that we had that day. It was a real foggy day. And I as I say, I liked the composition, but the photo was not that good. And I thought, well, let me see what I can do with it. And I added this texture to it, so it kind of maybe feels like it's on canvas or something. I played around a lot with the colors. Actually, this looks like it got cropped a little more. I had a little more on the bottom, I think. Maybe I did that when I sent it to you, I don't know. But I punched up, and this bush that was still kind of red, I deepened the color on that, muted some other colors, took some things out of the photo that were distractions. On the bottom where that white snow is there, there's one of these utility boxes, a green utility box. It really wrecked the picture. And that's something that a lot of people, there's a lot of discussion that we hear about what you should or shouldn't do to a photo. And my personal feeling about it is I'm making an image. If I'm doing a representational photo, if I'm doing something that's more journalistic, or if I'm doing something here at the museum where I'm taking a picture of an object, I'm not going to do that. But I look at this, I'm making a piece of art, and the camera is just part of the tools that I'm using to do it. The computer is the rest of it. So
yeah, I don't think that adding these features to a picture of an Elgin watch would really work as well.
Right.
If you go to Half Price Books, this is my favorite question that I'm going to ask you. I want to see what you come up with. There's going to be dozens of books that have rules in them about photography. The rule of thirds, leading lines, don't center the object, all of those things. What's your favorite rule to break?
I would say my favorite rule to break is fill the frame. I like having negative space. Now, I don't do it as often as I might like to, but one of the rules said that, and I've heard this, I first learned this from camera club judges. It said, if it doesn't add to the picture, it takes away from it. And that's not always the case. And you could say, you can argue that all kinds of different ways, but I think maybe that's the one rule. But I think rules make a lot of sense in photography, but they shouldn't be looked at as rules. You need to use your own judgment. And I'm going to, if you don't mind, I'm going to digress a little bit because I thought about this because I thought you might be asking this. I participated in a lot of the camera club competitions. And we used to joke, for those of you who are not familiar with this, about, it's only, fur and feathers are the kind of pictures that win and other things. And I do a lot of abstract, and when I would submit an abstract or something that was highly edited, judges didn't know what to do with it. Some of them were kind and said, we don't know what to do with it. Others were not so kind and just said, well, it should be this or it should be that. And I found I was doing a lot of things when I would take a photo, I would try to learn from what those judges said. And it got to the point where I'm taking a photo and I'm thinking, okay, how would this do in competition? And I realized, hey, that's not right. And again, I guess if you're submitting it for competition or taking it for competition, but then you're going to just be a matter of a good technician and you're going to lose your creative artistic ability. You have to kind of screw things up a little bit once in a while, I think. And I think all of us who are photographers know that some of our best photos might be accidents.
Yeah. Yeah, it was the photo that I had selected for that question, because I find this ironic that you brought up negative space, I was going to put this one up, which has the beautiful negative space at the top. But you did fill the frame, so good job.
Yeah.
I'd give it an 8.
Yeah.
I've long admired your still life photos. It's an area that I enjoy looking at, but I have no clue how to create. Every time that I've tried to set up a still life scene, I don't hit the mark. So I wondered if there was a process to your creative endeavors when you set up one of these scenes.
Yeah, keep going until you hit the mark. I don't hit the mark either. For every still life that I might share, there's maybe a good 15 or 20 of that same grouping that I couldn't get right. It's really tricky because, first of all, the things that I think of to put in a still life, are usually things that I'm familiar with. Some may be things that were my grandparents, that my folks kept or whatever, old things that, put together. This is stuff that we have, that we use. And in this particular photo, again, I just used a black seamless backdrop. And I liked, again, the kind of minimalist feel to it. This doesn't have much color in it. It's black, white, and red, a little bit of green on there. I like the contrast of the textures, of the very smooth texture of the porcelain servingware, and then the nice texture of the strawberries in there. But when I did this, one of the things that I think all photographers know, you're looking at a group of things and you see them in 3D. You're putting them on something flat and they have a whole different feel. And I find, my process, I set something up the way I think I need to see it. And I get that first shot, it's like, oh, this isn't delivering the feeling that I'm getting from it. What do I need to do? And I'll, reposition things, and I might think that, or see that, I need a little more black in here because this was too close to it. So I shifted over a half an inch or something. Or the balance just doesn't seem right. This is kind of different from a lot of the still lifes I do. A lot of the still lifes I do are more traditional.
Yeah.
And I really like those. I like the ones that look like, the lighting that you see with like the Dutch Masters kind of thing, that very strong north light that you get in there. This is not typical of those, but yeah, so again, my process, I guess, is it's a lot of trial and error. But, that's another thing about photography, when you talk about creating an image that probably most of us know and do. And that's, you look at something and you feel something about it when you're photographing it. But what you don't realize is it's not just your eyes that are seeing. It's, it's all your senses working. It's the environment that you're in. It's, is it hot? Is it cold? Is it arid? Is it humid? Does it smell? Is there a breeze? So all these things are working to give you an impression of this environment, and then you take a picture and you wonder why it doesn't convey what you felt. So I think that's the real trick, and I don't have an answer of how you do it, but if you can convey what you felt so that the viewer feels that same thing, then you've been really successful. And that's kind of what I try to do with some of these.
Yeah, and you obviously have a deep interest in still life for that much trial and error. Like I've seen 30 different still life photos that you've shot, and that means that you've shot a whole bunch of still lifes that you didn't like.
Right.
So that's fascinating, and this feels very familiar and home. And that's, I appreciate that very much.
Well, and sometimes what's the difference between a still life and a product shot? It's, you're going to interview Keith in a couple of weeks, and he does a lot of product work as part of his business. And I've watched him once when I was picking something up, setting up a product shot, and it's much like setting up a still life shot. And it also goes back to your question: can representational photography be artful? I think you see it in advertising all the time.
True.
So.
Yeah. So my last question for you is, how about what type of photos bring you the most joy? Is there
of my own right now, and I say right now because it evolves. In another year, maybe I'll want to do something quite different. But right now, I really love doing abstract things, whether that be macro shots of something that just looks different when it's close up, or whether I'm playing around with different filters and paintbrushes and things in a digital tool. That's kind of what I like, and that's also. I don't know if I'm jumping the gun. If you were going to ask me about photos people don't understand, nobody really likes those. I put a lot of stuff out on Facebook, and you can tell some people. Like I put one out a month ago or so of some geese and goslings, and got like 1 million likes on it, and everybody thought that was great. Put one of the abstract or still life, and 4 or 5 people, and mostly they're my family or closest friends. But
the sympathy likes?
Yeah, the sympathy likes, right.
What about photographers that inspire you? And like you mentioned a couple
Right.
from the 20s and
Right.
30s. Are there any more modern photographers?
Not necessarily that I know by name. I mean, I'll see things that I like, which is, also about being inspired. I look at a lot of art and a lot of photography, and, you see things that you think, oh, I wish I did that shot. And, you don't want to copy that, but sometimes that will inspire you or give you ideas. And so I think, there are people, local people. Carolyn is one. You are one. Keith French. I mean, I look at all of your photos that I see, and Eva Dorman from the Camera Club.
Yep.
I look at her stuff and I just want to throw my stuff away. So I wouldn't say there's any one or any group, but they're just, I think the more you look at things and train your eye to see, and when I say that, what I mean is we see things every day, and I have often referred to the adage of, kind of stop and smell the roses, slow down a little bit, and you'll see something in a different light or in a new way that maybe you can make art out of. And I did want to respond to your comment about the still lifes, about, that I've had so many and all this. Also, I've been retired for 10 years now, so I have been able to spend a lot of time. When I was working, there's a long period of time from the time I was in high school and college until I retired, that a lot of my photography was vacation pictures or things that I would do for my employers. I was able to use my photo skills to assist employers in different ways, either for training materials or one organization that I worked for put on a national conference every year. And they had a photo department and a photographer and a studio, and I would get drafted for 1 week out of the year to assist him and do things. So, there were a lot of years prior to retirement that I didn't have the time to put into it. So,
Yeah. Sorry.
You mentioned various settings. You go out and you want to take a picture and you see exactly what you want to take. And in the middle there are other influences. There is light, there are sounds, there are scents. Maybe a year later, when you look at that picture, can you still remember what it was like when you took that picture?
So far. We'll see how long that lasts, but don't ask me what I did yesterday. 50 years ago, I can tell you, but yesterday is often I can. The fun thing is, I'll look back at something that I did take many years ago, and I'll see something different in it. And that, again, that's one of the things I love about photography is, you've taken it one moment in time, but as time goes on, you may view that a little differently. So, but yeah, sometimes I can remember that. Sometimes a picture is what helps remember that. So.
Yeah.
What's the most frustrating part of being a photographer?
Oh, probably dealing with other people. I don't do a lot of people photography, but people who make a lot of assumptions. They see you've got a camera that's more than a cell phone, and they make assumptions. I've seen a lot of posts from people who talk about professional photographers being asked to do something for free because it's a favor and you can help build your portfolio and all of this nonsense. And it's kind of insulting if you're a professional. I'm not a professional, so that doesn't bother me. But I think people who, in what we call, who want to play the camera game, and when I was in college and I skied, we used to call it the ski game or whatever, and it's like comparing notes about equipment and not honest inquiries about what a piece of equipment does or can do, but it's like, are you a Nikon or a Canon guy? That kind of thing.
Does it matter?
Exactly. It was kind of funny. This weekend was my sister's 50th wedding anniversary, and I told her I would photograph the party, and being there. And so photographs with me in them, couldn't do that, and she wanted to make sure I was in some of the photographs. So my nephew, who is a police officer and does forensic photography, I had him take a couple of pictures that I could be in. And his daughter says to him, "Are you sure you can do that, Dad? It's not a Nikon." Because I have Canon equipment, but
do you ever get into a rut where you don't want to take any pictures? And how do you take a picture when you're in the rut?
I don't.
You don't?
I mean, I just let it go.
I mean, what pulls you out of that?
Usually some new idea comes across. You know, sometimes this lady over here in red will come up with something. She said, not knowing whether or not I'm in a rut, but she'll have an idea for something, and she'll commission me to do something. And we have a set of, I guess you'd call them still lifes that are in our kitchen. They're a series. She came to me one day and said, "You know, wouldn't it be cool if you just photographed a bunch of our different things in the kitchen, you know, some appliance things and bowls and whatever, and did them in an artistic manner?" And so I did about 15 different items, and she picked a dozen out of those, and we've got them framed all, and part of it is just the arrangement, because, you know, they're 3 and 3 lined up real evenly. Of course, hanging them is a whole nother story to get that perfect alignment, but they're really kind of cool. And so sometimes, you know, something like that, like I said, Jackie will come up with some idea and say, "Why don't you try this?" or "Why don't you try that?" You know, other times it's just a matter of where you are in life. I mean, like I said, for a long time, you know, especially before digital photography, when, you know, you had to make an effort to go out and buy your film and do all that, I'd go long periods without doing any photography. But it just comes back. I mean, I don't know if I have a good answer of how you can actually get yourself out. I suppose if you force yourself to do something different, maybe go someplace that you haven't been.
Ride in the car.
Yeah.
Look for
And
something.
yeah. Sometimes I'll even just go out in the backyard or in the basement or say, you know, what's here? But attend camera club groups and get ideas from different people. I don't know.
More of a comment. I'm just fascinated by that first photo, the Nixon one. That was the first one, right? Yeah. Do you have more, like, of that style?
Not a lot. I mean, I have, from that time period, I have a lot of negatives still.
It's all on film.
Yeah, it's all on film, and I haven't
You didn't
digitized.
print.
No, I mean, some of them were prints. I mean, some of the prints are faded because when I did this when I was photo editor for a college newspaper, and we did all our own developing and our own printing, and sometimes we didn't take the time, or we had a speedy process that we used. It was a kind of a machine thing to actually, once you expose the paper, it fed through it, and it didn't have a fixer on it, because the idea was this was going to be a one-time use, and it wasn't meant to last. And so we had to go through an extra step to fix them. And I have a handful of those that I still have, but I still have all the negatives from this stuff. And
Do you remember what they are? Like, is there more historical relevance?
not too much. They were mostly
I mean, I'm
just.
just thinking this is like a time or life.
He has a picture of every single president.
Yeah,
from
going-
Nixon onward, yeah.
I thought you were going to say from
hiding.
Washington on there. Yeah.
No, I didn't say Washington.
But
I just think that's a really cool photo.
and that was fortuitous. But you know, at that time, I took my camera with me everywhere. I didn't have any extra lenses. I had just, there was a standard 50 millimeter lens on it. And
Explain about the newspapers.
yeah, one of the things that I would do, and that's, I was just leading up to that, I used to carry in my wallet a little card, I handwritten it, that had the phone numbers of United Press International, UPI, and Associated Press, the AP, because, and the Tribune and the Sun-Times, because if you photograph some event and it was worthy of them using in their newspapers or in their system, they would come get the film from you, or you could take it to them. They'd pay you for it on the spot and do that. And I did have one of a train wreck, a train car crash that I came upon. And I called the Sun-Times. I called a couple of them, and I called the Sun-Times, and they said they were interested. I drove downtown with it, and they printed it. I think it was the Sun-Times. I don't remember, but they did, you know, print it. So, and I used to do a lot of that. I didn't get a lot printed, but I used to.
But they paid
do
really
that.
well.
Yeah, they paid me decently for it. Sight unseen too. That was kind of cool.
Wow. Well, thank you, sir.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thanks for including me.